Welcome to Al Bernstein Unplugged on boxing. In a 40-year Hall of Fame career, Al has chronicled some of the greatest moments in boxing history. On this podcast, you get to hear him expand on those memories and talk about the current news in the sport of boxing. You also hear Al interview some of the biggest names in the sport. Here's Al Bernstein Unplugged.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the show. On this episode, we're going to get a chance to visit with Lennox Lewis, who, of course, is a three-time world champion, an Olympic champion, and somebody I've known for decades now in the boxing world. I think he is one of the great ambassadors for the sport of boxing, and I've been looking forward to having a chance to chat with him. And I think you're going to find it really intriguing, some of the things he says about his long-lasting relationship, a complicated one with Mike Tyson, his fights with Evander Holyfield. And also, we're going to talk about a new film that is out on him called Lennox Lewis, The Untold Story, which you can see on Crackle TV. So go to that streaming service and you can see this film, which is excellent. I watched it, and it's a terrific film on Lennox Lewis. And I think we'll tell you some things that maybe you didn't know about him, delving a lot deeper into his personality. Lennox Lewis is not somebody who wears his emotions on his sleeve and isn't the kind of person that will quickly reveal himself to everybody. And so I think this is the kind of forum, a film like this, where you can really tell a lot about him. So anyway, we're going to talk about that as well. We're also, of course, going to answer your questions. And for that and a lot more, let me bring in my cohort, Mr. Trip Mitchell. Hey, Trip.
I am great. And Al, since this is our last show of a weird year, 2020, how would you look at the year in boxing? It's a strange year.
Yeah, you judge it, of course, in two parts. The part before the pandemic, where the sport was just getting going, and then how did the sport come back after, of course, we're still in the pandemic, but how did it come back when sports were at least able to get back into action, albeit without fans for the most part. I believe, boxing, when it came back, first of all, kudos to the top-ranked folks in ESPN for getting the sport back in action. They took the slings and arrows of trying to figure out the right way to do it with a series of shows that were, I think by their own admission, maybe not the super highest level of the shows that they do, but still some very entertaining fights. And they wanted to get the sport back, and I give them all the credit for doing that. And then as things went on, everybody kind of figured out how to get back in the fray, and all the different platforms and the different promotional groups were getting back in action. And I think in the last 4 or 5 months of this year, we've seen some very good boxing. There have been some really good fights, some fights that maybe exceeded expectations from what people thought. And even though many of the cards were changed because of COVID, a lot of fighters coming down with COVID, I think even with that, the sport came back in a manner that gave us some optimism looking forward to 2021. And, I am not a alarmist or a guy that's filled with hyperbole. I think most people will acknowledge that. But I think that what boxing has done, and this is where now there's a responsibility put on it, they've kind of set the table for a 2021 that's going to be pivotal for the sport, I believe. Because sports fans now, I think, especially boxing fans, they want the next level. They want the sport to do things like it did in 2014 and 2017, a couple years where they made huge fights and delivered to the fans. And for the most part, the last several years in boxing have been generally pretty good. But now the responsibility is on them to make important fights in 2021 and keep the momentum that they've kind of created a little bit, I think, with some of the good fights that they've made now.
So we'll get right to our questions. Abraham Gonzalez asked, Al, interesting to hear your thoughts on fighters' digital social media presence and if you feel there's value to it. Also, seeing the different phases of boxing all these years, should fighters invest time into that to further develop their brand in this current market? Great question.
Yeah, I thought that was really a terrific question, and one that uh, everybody everybody in business and in sport and any commercial endeavor uh, grapples with this question or has to make decisions on this question, because what's happened now in the world is that we've been able to some degree, take away the middleman, both in terms of providing editorial content to people, advertising content in effect, even though the social media platforms are careful to denote that if you're too far into something feeling like a commercial, you can't put it on there, but you can certainly market, that's for sure. And so boxers are in the same spot. Now, boxers have had a unique problem I think, for a long time. As the sport was less covered by the mainstream sports media, boxers had a hard time making additional or supplemental income beyond the money they made from fights, getting endorsements, and doing things of that nature. Partially because of the nature of the sport, not everyone is on board with boxing as a sport. And secondly, because these boxers weren't getting well enough known. Well, now things like social media have allowed them to create their brand better, to push their brand, make people understand who they are and what they bring to the table. And I think it's probably helped them create other monetary situations for themselves that they couldn't do before. Now, with the opportunities that social media brings, it brings danger, doesn't it? Yeah, even people as subdued as me, or as some would say, as vanilla as me, have had their share of issues on social media where no matter what you say, it isn't benign, is it, Trip? Nothing's benign on social media.
Especially in this day and age.
Right. You can make a statement that you think is so benign and so lacking in controversy, and you might get 5 responses on any platform, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, you name it. You might get responses that astound you that you actually just offended somebody, and it seems almost impossible. So there is the danger there, and we have seen boxers, like everyone else, who's using social media, do so in a less than responsible way and get into problems. But I think for every single boxer, just like for every promoter and every manager, and for any athlete and anyone involved in the world of sports marketing, I think social media is an important function. And any fighter that hasn't sat down with their team and thought about the best way to use it is making a huge mistake. So one of the fighters who did not have that luxury of having social media when he fought to do marketing and talk about himself was the great Lennox Lewis, who of course was a 3-time heavyweight world champion. He fought from 1989 to 2003, and he was just a phenomenal fighter. And I believe he changed the landscape in the heavyweight division. He's the one that ushered in the era of the big heavyweights. And I mentioned he's a great ambassador for the sport of boxing. He is that. And I have found him to be always a gentleman and somebody that I am always anxious to talk to. And we had a chance to do that right here. Here's my interview with Lennox Lewis. Lennox, you are going to be ringside for the fight between Errol Spence and Danny Garcia. And, Spence coming back after this long layoff after his accident. I'm just wondering, do you think that Danny Garcia, even though it's not his style, would be super aggressive early in the fight because Spence is coming off that accident?
I don't know. It's a good theory because you can fight the fight different ways, but it's really how you wage the war. And I think that may be a mistake. Because uh, um, the truth wants to prove himself. He knows that everybody's saying, the accidents probably affected him. So they want to see how good he is. If anything's affected by this accident.
Right.
So everybody's going to be paying close attention. And Danny Garcia is, he's a good counter puncher.
Right.
So he's not really going to commit himself too early. He's going to check out the situation, and he's got a lot of boxing knowledge, so I've seen him do that before. And
yeah, interesting. Yeah, so in a way, it doesn't suit his style to do that, so it would be a departure for him.
Right, and I actually think Errol Spence is going to come after him. He's going to, the way how he fought Porter really surprised me. I'm shocked that he bullied the bully type of thing. And he wasn't really trying to run around the ring, but he did show some good angles and some good combinations. So I think I'm expecting the same. I think he wants to prove himself, and he's going to go right after Danny Garcia.
And, one of the interesting things about this fight, and you're very aware of having the right people in your corner. You had a wonderful relationship with Emmanuel Stewart, which we'll talk about in a second or two. But this fight is unique in that both of the trainers of these fighters, Angel Garcia, of course, Danny's dad, and Derek James, the trainer of Errol Spence, have been with them for a long time. So they're not rent-a-trainers. They're people that really understand their fighter.
Yeah, and that's very important. It's better to go to battle with the people that that's been around you the longest, so they know how to motivate you. They can tell if anything's going wrong, and the game plan that them guys are gonna play out will be, everybody's gonna be watching. So it's not just the fighters; the corners matter as well, because they're experienced corners. And the information they give to their fighter at the specific times is very important. So, there's a lot to look forward to in this fight. I think it's going to be an exciting fight. And, who doesn't want a good fight? Who doesn't want to see one? We all do.
Sure. How important is this fight to as far as boxing coming back now after the pandemic? This is one of the fights people have focused on.
Yeah, I mean, big fights is what people want, especially checking out Danny Garcia. They want to see how he's going to hold up. This is an important fight for him. Nobody really knows until they get in the ring and see each other fight.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Well, it's certainly going to be an excellent
What
matchup.
What are you saying?
Yeah, I listen, I feel like it's a really interesting fight because of the style matchups. As you point out, Errol Spence will be aggressive, and Danny Garcia is a very good counterpuncher. So when you put those two together, and you made the point that Errol Spence maybe wasn't as aggressive as he should have been against Sean Porter, so maybe we'll see more of that.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens. Well, it's going to be a terrific fight, and you will be ringside calling it on Fox, and we'll look forward to your comments.
Yes.
Lennox, you are kind of the standard by which all heavyweights, big heavyweights of this era, are measured. You're the person that we can look to and say he's the man that changed the heavyweight division and started it in a certain direction. And yet, one of the many charms about you, I think, is that you, in commenting on the heavyweights of today, both as a commentator and just in general when you're asked, you're very careful to not make it seem like a competition or a comparison between you or your era and the current heavyweights. You are happy to give them their due and say, hey, this is something different. How did you kind of adopt that attitude?
Yeah, I found that, once you retire, there's always pressure on the next generation, and they're always compared to the past generation. And I never looked at boxing like that. When people used to say to me, oh, well, how do you think you could do against Muhammad Ali? I'm like, Muhammad Ali's my hero. Why would I do anything against him? I can't see myself boxing him right now. You know, he's given me the tools mentally and physically to go out and create something for myself. That's why I'm the pugilist specialist. You know, I've got an arsenal filled with punches I can throw at any given moment. This is who I am. So it's unfair to really put me in that category. The category that you can put me in is I'm in a room filled with great men. So that's how I look at it.
It's a very good point. But I always loved that nickname too, the pugilist specialist. I always thought that was a great nickname. Now yes. Your story is told in a film that just came out recently, Lennox Lewis, The Untold Story, and it's available on Crackle, a streaming service where people can take a look at it. I've gotten to see a portion of it. I can't wait to see the rest of it. But it seems like a film that really is telling your story in a more complete way than it's been told before.
Yeah, I mean, it gives an opportunity for everybody to look at my career through different eyes. You know, they're being fed a certain food which they've ingested, but they haven't seen all the menu.
Yeah.
So basically, you know, we're just giving, you know, when you look at to compare Holyfield, Mike Tyson, and me, we all have similar lives. We all started from somewhere. You know, we all have something to say to the kids, and we've all been through hard times. So it really just shows, you know, my life wasn't really, you know, a bunch of roses. You know, it shows my ups and downs, and it also shows my boxing career in a little complete fashion. So, you know, and even gets to, you know, allows the public to see even me in the dressing room. I don't think a lot of people see me in the dressing room preparing for a fight. This is what I go through. So sees when I lost in Africa, how I dealt with that. And, you know, it really shows the public that we all go through ups and downs, and it's really how we bounce back.
You're someone who has gone through your journey with such equanimity. You are always even keel. You have presented a dignified image to the world, so that some people might get the wrong impression that it was easy, which clearly it never is. And becoming a world champion and getting past things you had to get past, hardly easy.
Yeah, I mean, for my generation, we never really complained about it. We just got on with it. And, you know, if we fell off the horse, we just got up, brushed ourselves off, and get back on the horse and make sure that we never fall off again.
Yeah, so, that's a good way to put it. Yeah. I'm wondering, I've never asked you this. Can you pinpoint kind of the either exact time or general time when you feel you started to get true acceptance in America, coming as a fighter from across the pond? You know, America is a very jingoistic place. We sometimes don't always give everybody credit when they deserve it when they're from somewhere else. When did you feel like you started to get true acceptance in the United States?
I think it was after the Razor Ruddock fight. You know, everybody started taking note. It's like, whoa, you know, he went, I think, about 14 rounds with Mike Tyson and only 2 with me.
Right.
So people had that to compare and said, hey, you know, this guy's serious, and look how he did it. He did it in fine fashion. So I think that was really the one, because, you know, as I came over to America, I was in New York and was walking along the street, and it was like, you know, a lot of the street people were recognizing me, truck drivers, hey, you're that Lewis guy. Everybody else was walking past, you know, doing their own thing. But guys that were like working on the street recognized me.
Yeah, so you started to gain that acceptance, and of course, one of the I'll never forget covering your fight with Evander Holyfield at Madison Square Garden. The interesting thing is, I actually think that the bad decision that you received in that fight when they made it a draw, and clearly most everyone felt you won the fight, I actually think in a way that also cemented your appeal to America, because they realized, hey, this guy came over here, fought a hell of a fight, and did not get his just rewards.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. again, the street people saying, hey, you got ripped off. The main thing that I loved about it is they got a chance to see the matchup.
Yeah.
They could, any part of any public or any guy that loves boxing can just turn off the sound and watch it, and they can be the judge.
Right.
And that's all I wanted. I wanted them to see, everybody, the public, just to see the matchup. They can be the judge. Who are the best?
Yeah, that's for sure. You have had the other main figure during the course of your career, and you alluded to him, obviously, is Mike Tyson, who we recently saw in an exhibition against Roy Jones Jr. You have had a complicated relationship with Mike Tyson going all the way back to when you guys were teenagers, and you were together at the Custom Auto training camp when you guys actually went to see movies, and you got to know him. And of course, over the years, it was tumultuous. How do you kind of process where things were at the beginning and where they've gotten to with Mike Tyson? Because now, you have a cordial relationship with him.
Yeah, I mean, it all started obviously in 1983 at the World Junior Championships in Santo Domingo, when I actually won the tournament, and the Americans said that, hey, you didn't box the best. And I'm like, who's the best? And they said, it's, Mike Tyson. He doesn't like taking planes. His manager, Custom Auto, doesn't like taking planes. And me and my trainer at the time, we were saying, well, who is this guy, man? We need to find out who this guy is, because a lot of people didn't want to spar me either.
Yeah,
so
I'm sure.
We found each other in that sense. And me and my trainer, bless his soul, Arnie Beam, elected to drive up there. We drove up there. We met Custom Auto. We stayed at the house. I met Mike, lovely guy. Until we got in the ring, that's when the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde came out in Mike. I thought he courted me and sweetened me up, and then tried to beat me up. So it gave me a lesson as well. It's not where you're from, it's where you're at. So I'm in his territory, so I got to be careful. Yeah. And that was then. And then he went off to do his illustrious pro career. And I was still amateurs at the time, so I was focused on amateurs. He was focused on pro. And I didn't know if we were going to actually meet, but when we were sparring at that time, Custom Auto, in the last round, said, Mike, don't you do that. You're going to face this man one day. And I'm like, that was always ringing in the back of my head. And I wondered if it would ever come true, and it did. So Custom Auto's words came true.
They did indeed, yeah. Every day, or not every day, but many days, I think about Manny Stewart. I was privileged to be his friend. Of course, you had a wonderful relationship with him, both professionally and personally. And he's the kind of guy that there's one person in boxing that when I talk to people, they always say, when people leave us, how they're missed. I think Manny Stewart is missed by more people and more often than almost anybody I can think of in this sport.
Yeah. I tell you, for even Vladimir, he was missed as well.
Very much so, yes.
Yeah, I was actually surprised at Vladimir not trying to get another trainer. I guess there was no trainer after Manny, and even the effect of what Manny used to look after all the kids. I remember going down to Detroit. His house used to be packed with kids that he just took in, and and talked to them, cooked for them. He was a hell of a guy in that sense, and you're right. He's going to be missed and forever remembered.
Yeah, that's for sure. I want to remind people the film that they can look at on Crackle is called Lennox Lewis, The Untold Story, which will give you a fuller picture of his career and also him as a man. And the one thing that I have to tell you is often people, when they talk to me about knowing boxers, and obviously you're one of the fighters that I've known over the years and enjoyed interacting with, they think of you as kind of an enigmatic character because you don't fully reveal yourself. You are not the kind of person that lets out your emotion every 2 seconds in life. And so I think this film will be really beneficial to people to find out a little bit more about who you are.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. I can assure you that, even the feedback right now, people said they'd never realized, what kind of person I was, or that this happened, So even for you, like when you see it, it's going to bring back a lot of memories.
Oh, yeah.
So.
I can't wait. I can't wait. Well, you are now, of course, connected to boxing as a commentator. And I'm wondering, does that connection, because when you're involved in boxing, many people want to continue to feel the connection after they've ended their career, and they either get involved in the business side, or sometimes they train, or sometimes they get into commentary. Does the commentary give you the kind of connection to the sport that is enjoyable to you?
Yeah, absolutely does. Absolutely does. It gives me a chance to show, what type of mind I have, because really boxers see the fight differently than somebody that really hasn't stepped in the ring. And I'm happy that I'm able to give across a lot of those type of opinions, because a lot of people say, hey, I didn't see that. Oh, I didn't realize that. I didn't know that. So I love that.
Yeah, you do that. And one of the funny things, you and I have never commentated a fight together. Someday we'll get a chance to do it, perhaps.
Absolutely. I look
that
forward
would be a
to
lot
that.
of that would be a lot of fun. Lennox,
Yeah.
I really appreciate you visiting with me, and we will talk a lot about the film, which I hope everybody gets a chance to take a look at. And I've said this before, and I will say it again: you are one of the greatest ambassadors the sport of boxing has ever had.
Thank you, Al, and you too. Bless you too. We're happy to have you, and we're glad that you're here with us.
Thanks so much. Hey,
All right.
Take care.
Thank you.
So I thoroughly enjoyed that conversation with Lennox Lewis. I hope you did as well. I find him to be a really interesting man who some people think of as because he's not controversial, and because he doesn't trash talk, and because he doesn't engage in controversies, some people think he's not interesting, and I really disagree with that viewpoint. I find him fascinating, and I think a lot of the things that he says on the sport and on life are intriguing, and so I'm happy we had a chance to chat with him. And we still have more questions, do we not, Trip?
We do. But first, before we get to the questions, British heavyweights. We've talked about this before. What is it? Something in the water? Why is the UK all of a sudden developing the best fighters in the world?
Yeah, the heavyweight division changed in terms of Europeans dominating it when the Klitschko's came on the scene. It wasn't just the Klitschko's. The American heavyweight became kind of like the buffalo, looked extinct for a while. Another American institution that became extinct. But, and the Europeans took over. Then other than Deontay Wilder, who of course won a world title and as an American and has been a major player in the heavyweight division, obviously, the fighters from the UK started to become important, with Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury. David Haye was, on the scene. And we've had a number of contenders from the UK as well. And even currently now, we just saw Joe Joyce win an important fight. There are a number of heavyweights in the UK that are of note. And of course, the two that are most of note, Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury, look like they are going to create a lot of headlines.
Well, it's a division, and as someone who grew up in the same era as you did, I loved it when America was preeminent in the heavyweights because it just made the sport so important to the fans in the U.S.
Yeah, to our fans, we like big things, right? We like big cars, and we like everything big. And so the heavyweight division, which was, almost exclusively, with the exception of situations here and there. The heavyweight champion was mostly an American for so many years. And, Americans look at it jingoistically like, oh, that's our birthright to have the heavyweight champion. But of course, that turned out after starting, with Lennox Lewis and the Klitschko's, and now the current era, we realize it is clearly not, even though Wilder has part of the heavyweight crown, and he's had it for a while. I think having a good heavyweight division is important to Americans as well. And part of the intrigue of what's going on right now, yes, you have Wilder, who is an American, who of course has been involved in those two big fights with Tyson Fury. But I think just the fact that the heavyweight division is a competitive one, and after kind of a lackluster period, it's back on people's minds. I think that helps the sport. Now, I'm not one of those people that thinks that without a dominant or strong heavyweight division, the sport of boxing is somehow doomed. I don't believe that, but it doesn't hurt to have a good heavyweight division.
Okay. And our next question comes from NJNYC0701. And his question, what are the chances we get both a Fury-Joshua fight in the heavyweights and a Spence-Bud Crawford fight in 2021?
An appropriate question. And by the way, based on his Twitter handle, is he like Maxwell Smart's secret agent? Is that who he is? So,
we just dated ourselves on that one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Maxwell Smart, the most recent possible secret agent I can mention. Yeah. There's a bunch of 30-year-olds scratching their heads right now. So on those two fights, those are the two fights, or two of the major fights that boxing fans, and it goes back to some of what I was saying before about the year 2021 and the expectations of this coming year. The Fury-Joshua fight, and let's be honest, that's a 90% to 100% chance that we'll get at least one, possibly two, because I think they were talking about trying to make it a two-fight series. That fight, I believe, is going to happen. The only real issue that they have to deal with is, for the most part, is Alexander Usyk, who is has a mandatory against Anthony Joshua, and they're going to have to figure out a way to make him happy in waiting while all this takes place, and for him to get the first shot at whoever wins. But I think that fight will almost surely be made, and it will be, whether it will be the first one. If they have two of them, I think one will be for sure in England. But whether they will hold that one in England remains to be seen. There'll be a lot of money thrown at them from Dubai, probably. And Anthony Joshua has already said publicly he's willing to try and temper his financial needs for that fight if they could hold it in England. And I'm sure Tyson Fury as well would like to see it held there. It would be the biggest boxing event probably ever in the UK, and is going to be a worldwide event that people are going to be anxious to see for sure. But I think that one's 90% to 100. Now, Spence Crawford. This is the fight that is dangerously close to becoming Pacquiao-Mayweather, because that fight, of course, didn't happen for a long, long time. It finally happened later than it should have. And in fact, Pacquiao ended up being, even though since then he's performed very well, he ended up being kind of a diminished fighter in that. He had an injury. He didn't fight on the level probably, and some of that was due to Floyd Mayweather, of course, by doing an excellent job. But it didn't turn out to be anything near what people wanted it to be, even though financially it was very successful. And this fight is in danger of that, because Bud Crawford's 33, Spence is 30. Now, the good news is that Spence came back and showed he is not a diminished fighter after his very bad car accident, and good for him that he's not, good for him that he survived it. And he came back and performed exceptionally well against Danny Garcia. But this is a fight that really, really, really needs to happen for them and for the sport of boxing. they can both make more money doing that fight than any other fight. That's just a fact. Yes, they're both being compensated very well for the fights they're making, but they can make more money. The sport itself desperately needs that fight. And the reason it desperately needs it is because, like the Pacquiao-Mayweather fight, the mainstream sports media, when there's a fight that boxing doesn't make, they get fixated on that fight. And they always use it as an example that, well, see, boxing, they never make the fights people want to see, and there's too much infighting, when in reality, boxing might be making a lot of great fights. It was true, I think, as far as Pacquiao-Mayweather was concerned. While that fight wasn't being made, there were a lot of other great ones being made that the mainstream sports media was kind of ignoring. So it's kind of like an albatross around the sport's neck when that happens. And in this case, this fight is the example that the mainstream sports media uses when they're talking about boxing not making good fights. So this fight really needs to happen in the year 2020. Now, Crawford said, I don't need it for my legacy. I think, but I will beg to differ. And it's purely a matter, it's not a criticism of him, and it's not a criticism of anybody except circumstances. Errol Spence has had an opportunity to face more of the credible welterweights that exist in this world. He's had an opportunity to face Sean Porter and Danny Garcia and other welterweights as well. And we'll have an opportunity to face more of them. And the question is, can Bud Crawford, because of the promotional issues? He's Top Rank and doesn't have all those welterweights available to them, and that's who Bud Crawford is with. And they haven't been able to, PBC and Top Rank have not been able to do these crossover fights with the other welterweights like Thurman and Pacquiao and Porter and the like, facing Crawford, or of course Errol Spence. So he has fewer of these great guys available to him. And the reality is that because of that, he's not really fought the A-level welterweights. He just hasn't. And I think that it is important, like if you're going to worry about legacy, if you don't care, then that's fine, you don't care. But if you're going to think about legacy, I think it's important for him to get this fight, to demonstrate that, he is the best welterweight. And look, there's no question Bud Crawford is a fantastic fighter. He's been good at every weight class, and he's a terrific fighter. There's no criticism of him not being a great fighter, but we don't know how great, and we don't know how he will function against the A-level welterweight competition that is out there. He might run through everybody. He might beat Errol Spence handily. Who knows? I doubt that. I'm sure it will be a competitive and a terrific fight. So I think it's important on a number of different levels for the men involved and the sport of boxing.
Well, and one of the things, Al, if that fight, let's say, gets pushed till later in 2021, it could be in Las Vegas, and potentially it could be at the new Raiders Stadium, which would give them a live gate that is incredible.
Yeah, very good point. And it isn't likely to happen until later in the year. So, and that will probably be one of the many reasons why they will even shoot for then. That fight will not be made in the first part of the year, the first half of the year. So by the time it is made, let's say it's in the fall, there's a pretty good chance, if nothing else, real good chance that they can put it at Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas with somewhat lesser amount of people there than filling up the entire arena, which would still be a crowd of maybe 30,000 people or something of that nature, and probably could do the same thing. Errol Spence would love it down at Texas, at Jerry Jones's house in Texas, at that arena as well, that stadium as well. So yeah, it would. The fact that it is likely to be later in the year will probably add that additional revenue stream and add that level of excitement to it. And I think it's about a 50-50 chance that happens. The pressure, I believe, is going to continue to build on them to do it. Everyone has already seen that there's been a strained relation between Crawford and Bob Arum of Top Rank. I believe his contract will at some point expire late in 2021, I believe. So, whether that will be the breaking point and then he will be free to fight whoever he wants. And then, of course, they have to actually make the fight, or whether Top Rank and PBC can do it as entities remains to be seen. But whatever, that is a fight that boxing fans really want to see.
Great. And our final question of the year from Mr. Percy Lee Carey Jr. In your professional opinion, who wins between Shakur Stevenson and Chris Colbert, and why?
This is a really, really interesting question. First of all, the 130-pound division is fantastic. It has as much depth as almost any weight class that I can think of. You have champions like Miguel Berchelt and Jamel Herring, and Herring is fighting Carl Frampton. And Shakur Stevenson is in that weight class, obviously. And you've got fighters like young fighters like Chris Colbert, who we're going to talk about in a second, and Xavier Martinez, who is a terrific fighter, and just a number of other superb fighters in that division. And we saw in their last outings, just less than a week ago, we saw both Shakur Stevenson in his fight winning by a dominating decision, and then we saw Chris Colbert, who's 1 year older than Stevenson at 24, both, of course, undefeated. We saw him beating Jaime Arboleda in a knockout, knocked him out in the 11th round. And that was an exciting fight. Arboleda, a very credible opponent who had come in with 13 knockouts in his 16 wins. They produced a 9th round that was one of the best rounds of boxing I've called in the last year, and I think one of the best rounds of boxing, period, that ended at the end of the round. It would have been a round probably Arboleda would have won 10-9, but it was an exciting round, certainly, which Colbert got a lot done as well as Arboleda. And then right at the end of the round, Colbert was able to land a knockout or knockdown within the last 10 seconds of the round, which turned it to a 10-8 round. And then in the 11th round, he was able to twice knock down Arboleda and win by TKO. Both of these men showed tremendous skills and showed us why a potential fight between them would be very intriguing. Now, and also I mentioned Berchelt. He's going to fight Oscar Valdez, it looks like, who's a former champion from 126 pounds, who's coming up and now is at 130. And, oh, by the way, Vasily Lomachenko is now coming back to 130, so that's yet another terrific fighter in that weight class. So, right now, Stevenson wants to fight the winner of the Jamel Herring-Carl Frampton fight, which would be a very good fight, and Jamel Herring and Frampton will be a good fight. So Colbert, who will probably be looking for other avenues to get a world title, wouldn't be fighting Shakur Stevenson for at least a year and a half if they can make that happen. And again, that's another one where the promotional and network responsibilities of the two fighters are at issue. But I don't think there's any boxing fan, after their performances this past weekend, that wouldn't want to see Shakur Stevenson and Chris Colbert in the ring. Colbert showed us a different version of himself. He's always been a slick boxer, but in his last fight against Jezreel Corrales, a former champion, an important win for him, it wasn't an exciting fight. And Colbert, with only 5 knockouts, now 6 after the knockout that he had over Arboleda, has not known as a power puncher, but he turned it on in this fight. And he came out to make not only a statement in winning, but I think a marketing statement to say, hey, I'm a guy you're going to want to see moving forward. And so I think he and Stevenson both will make a great fight. Now, as who would win, right now, I think Colbert is a little behind Stevenson in terms of his overall development, even though he's a year older. He has not, Stevenson's already won a world title at 126. And I think Colbert is very close to where Stevenson is, but not quite there yet. So as this fight marinates, to use Bob Arum's famous word, Colbert will, make up the difference. And by the time they get in the ring, it would be, I think, a pick'em fight. And it would be one that I think would be scintillating and boxing fans would really want to see. And again, that division has so much talent in it that I think we're going to see a great fight. I'll tell you the fight I would love to see in the interim, but they probably won't make it, is Xavier Martinez, who just had a big win over Claudio Moreira on one of the on the Charlo pay-per-view card. He and Colbert would be a dynamic matchup, and they are both promoted by the same group, so that one is one that potentially could happen. Now, all through the year, or in recent months, we've been talking about our association with Tommy Ankello, who is has world-class boxing YouTube channel, which is a great channel that provides videos that are kind of geared to fighters, to amateur fighters, even pro fighters, that they're instructional, they're educational, but they're also fascinating. They're also, I think, interesting to boxing fans who want to learn about the sport. And I find myself, every time I look at one of his videos, when he has a new video, learning something fascinating and different about the sport and about how certain fighters go about their business of creating strategies. So we want to thank our friend Tommy Ankello and urge people to go to his website.
Well, it's our last show of the year. And it was funny during the break, Al, you said, what movies are you were talking to Chris and I, our producer, what we were excited to go see. And I said I'm the Grinch on that front, but I asked you how many movies you were in, and you ticked off 8 movies.
Yeah, I think about 8. Maybe there might be 9, and then a bunch of TV shows. So I've been fortunate to be in a few, but again, never in a Christmas movie. Now that would be, I would love that. But
if John Hughes was still around, your fellow Chicago, and had sadly passed away, maybe he could have put you in Home Alone 7.
Which will be released right around the same time Rocky 7 is released.
So who have you played in the majority? Have you played a dynamic, interesting, smart guy in most of the movies?
Yes, I've played a character that I find fascinating. Me, actually. It was, remember when Al Franken was on Saturday Night Live, he said it was the Al Franken decade. For me, every decade in terms of movies has been the Al Bernstein decade, because primarily that's what I've played a few other characters that were slightly different. One time I was a ring announcer, and the other time I was kind of another character, not exactly me. But for the most part, I've played me. And now here's the thing. There's enormous pressure on you, because let's say you don't play you very well. How could you do a worse acting job than that? So, there's a lot of pressure. People used. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Well, have you been reviewed? Have you ever seen a review, saying Sly Stallone was okay, but Al Bernstein was amazing as himself?
He didn't measure up to being himself. No, for the most part, while I've gotten mentions in some reviews, I have not actually been critiqued for my acting ability. I've been critiqued for my music ability, but never for my acting ability. So I got one terrible music review, by the way. I did one of the shows I did before one of the big fights in the 80s. I'd already done a bunch and gotten pretty, for the most part, both the response was generally pretty good. This one critic who's writing for the Las Vegas Review-Journal came, and she just did not like anything about what had happened. She didn't like I always did a lot of different song parodies in addition to doing standards and doing blues and other things. She didn't like those. She didn't like the material of that I did. And everything about it was bad. Now, the funny thing is, we had a mutual friend who was a singer in Las Vegas, And about 5 months after that, I found myself going to see my friend, Loretta Holloway, who was a singer. And I sat at the booth that she had reserved for people she knew. And she didn't think about this. And who shows up to sit at the booth we're at but this woman who had reviewed me just 5 months earlier and, eviscerated me in the newspaper. So I handled it, I thought, in a dignified way. Right after I spit in her eye, I offered my hand to, in handshake.
Well, it reaching into her wallet and stealing her Amex card to put everything on her card,
yeah,
I thought was a little tacky.
I thought I was due at least that. So never got reviewed though in a regular role. So Christmas time, of course, this is the time that we do look at all the movies that we. Now, do you guys go back? We start around mid-December, and I will admit to a guilty pleasure that I've admitted to on Twitter. I am a Hallmark Christmas movie junkie. My wife and I. They are the most formulaic movies ever made in the history of film, and there are only like 3 plots that get regurgitated virtually every third movie. But for some reason, we can't stop ourselves from watching them. Do you guys watch Christmas movies? Or holiday
well, first
movies?
of all, the Hallmark movies are truly horrible. And sadly, I've auditioned for 3 or 4. They shoot a lot of them in Salt Lake.
Oh, so you auditioned for a couple.
I have not made a Hallmark movie, which might be a reflection on my acting ability.
Or maybe the fact that you have this predisposed idea to them that you find them for less than dynamic. Maybe that maybe that affected your performance a little bit in the auditions.
I maybe went in with an attitude, but that's a good point. I'm going to work on that in the future.
All right. We're going to have to sit down. We'll watch some Hallmark movies. Now, here's the interesting thing. So I watched a movie the other night called Dashing December, it was called. And it was on Paramount. And it was exactly the Hallmark formula of movies, save one thing. The main character came back to, Andy McDowell was in the movie, and her son came back to visit her around Christmas time, and he had never been involved. She has a ranch, and he was never that involved, and the ranch was failing, and he was part of working out a deal for the ranch to be purchased by a developer who was going to put a racetrack in there. And he comes home, and like in all Christmas movies of that ilk, he falls in love, and that kindles his with somebody on the ranch, and it rekindles his interest in the ranch. The difference, though, between this movie and all the Hallmark movies is he fell in love with another man. So clearly, that is a movie that we are never going to see on the Hallmark channel. And as I was watching it, I looked at the description, and I'm watching the movie, and I'm realizing the direction it's going to go in, and I'm like, holy cow, this is not your normal Hallmark movie. It was a charming movie and very well done. And of course, now we talked about social media. Of course, I tweeted about it, and needless to say, there were some people that were annoyed that I found it to be a charming movie. But that's another story. We won't get into any of that because.
Al, you will be the only boxing announcer who ever admits liking Hallmark movies.
I will be. Yes, I will be the only. There wouldn't. And oftentimes when I talk about it, people are shocked and appalled. But what can I say? Well, anyway, we want to wish everybody, of course, a happy holiday. My best wishes to you. And Chris, our fine producer, who does a terrific job. You don't get to see him on this show, but he does a fantastic job of producing the podcast as well as our TV show. He works exceedingly hard on it. And it's a really complicated endeavor to do both of these shows and turn one into the other and deal with the different interviews, because there are different expectations on the TV show than there are on the podcast. And he does a wonderful job, and want to wish him the best. And of course, you, Mr. Tripp, I hope you have a wonderful holiday season.
And there are a couple other people on our team that we should shout out to. First of all, Kelly Kantz,
Yes.
who is with Kantz Media in Nashville, and she does an amazing job. She has taken something. We started this podcast back in March, you and I.
Yeah.
And we just got a glimmer, and Chris and Lee helped us on our end.
Yeah,
Kelly took
also
it around.
props to Lee, who has produced many shows and does a wonderful job as well.
And then your agent. I don't know where you found her, but 80 is amazing.
Yeah, 80 Zuckerman, who helped put all this together. She happens to be my sister and also manages my my affairs. So we've had a good team working on this, and I'm glad you actually brought it up that way because, you know, we started out doing a podcast. It's now a TV show that's on all over the United States and in Canada and the Caribbean, and we're hoping for more distribution as we head into 2021. So it's been a great journey of doing this, and I want to thank your company, Let's Do Something Productions, because without you guys, I wouldn't be in the podcast business. You were the driving force that made this happen. And so it's been a great endeavor for me. I enjoy working with you, of course, and I enjoy the process of this show where we get to visit with different people, both in and out of the boxing world. We've done interviews with folks that are boxing fans but are involved in other endeavors. So it's been a great year, and I know, like you, I'm looking forward to 2021. So,
a lot of fun. Thanks for everything, Al.
Yeah, been great. Great year, and we're looking forward to an even better one in the one coming up. Happy holidays to all of you. We'll be back with new shows starting in the first week in January with a lot of big name guests that will be unrolling. And we hope you have a great holiday. Take care.